I tend to begin by wanting us all to arrive together more fully. And so I invite you to get comfortable where you are and feel your feet on the ground. Feel the solidity of the ground beneath your feet. And even though this is human ground, there's divine ground, wild ground below it. And so feeling down, feeling that what beneath your feet, the earth is supporting you, holding you up. Feel the solidity of the earth. And feel the solidity of your own body and of your bones. Bones that are solid like the earth, but also sensing like the earth, and moving like the earth, and changing like the earth. Feel how Earth's gravity gives weight to your body of bone and flesh and blood. Her gravity is her love, drawing you toward her core, holding you close. And feel the ocean of air flowing around you. Flowing across your skin and flowing through you. Through your breath. The air that enters your body now has been in the body of every being who has ever drawn breath. The air that leaves your body now will be in the body of every being who ever breathes from this moment onward. And as you feel that thread of breath weaving you into the web of life, connecting you, draw that thread, draw your awareness, draw your attention, and bring your hand to your own beating heart within your chest. Feeling for your heartbeat. And bring your attention not to the thought of a beating heart, but to the feeling of your heart beating. And as you feel your heart beating, remember that your heart has beat for you in every moment of your life, without your ever needing to think, without your ever needing to ask. Playing the rhythms of joy and sorrow, of love and loss, of exile and homecoming, separation and reunion, playing the rhythm of every moment of your life. And as you remember all your heart has done for you, thank your heart. Let gratitude arise like the bright and dark waters from the well in the other world where our river has its source, flowing up to wash through the chambers of your heart, swirling through your heart, washing through your heart, filling it to overflowing, washing over your heart, and flowing into your blood, carried by your blood to every organ, to every tissue, to every cell, to all the spaces within and all the spaces between. And as it flows to your lungs, let it filter into your breath. As it flows into your breath, let that gratitude flow out with your breath. Bring gratitude to every body the air moved through before it moved through yours. Bring gratitude to every body that air will move through from now until the world itself stops breathing. Gratitude to every being simply for the work of continuing the breath of the world. And as the air flows back to you, receive and return the blessing of their presence. The presence of the ancestors who dreamed you. The presence of the descendants, whether of spirit or blood, who remember you. Receive their blessing and bring that blessing and your breath and your awareness back to your own beating heart. Staying with the feeling of your heart beating. Staying with its rhythm. Rhythm of the heart beating within the cavern of your chest. Echoing through your body of flesh and blood and bone. Upon the body of this good green earth. Agus Tamil and Soanish, we are here now. We are here now. And the here where we are now is the here that's always available to us. This world and the other world are part of one great world, one great flow. And as John Moriarty said, to learn to speak is to learn to say that our river has its source in an other world well, and that everything we say about the hills and about the stars might be a way of saying there are 9 hazels that grow over the well in the other world where our river has its source. And to understand that is to understand that that is just as real in every moment as the things our ordinary eyes can see, as the things we hear with our ears, as the scents we breathe in on the wind, as what we taste with our tongues, as what we feel with our hearts. So we began with this practice of going to the heart, which I learned from Stephen Buhner, now among the ancestors, and from his beloved Julia McIntyre, who is still alive and living and speaking and writing these things. And one of the most important things that I learned from Stephen is that it's our heart that feels the touch of the world upon us. And this is not a metaphor. Just as when Terence McKenna said, the world is alive and is always speaking to us. This is not a metaphor. And I can watch people's minds rushing around all the time for, well, what's that a metaphor for? It's like, no, this is not a metaphor. This is how things are. This is what really is. And so I came to this coming into the body and coming into the heart because in a world that I didn't feel like I belonged in, I was so far out of them that I need to really learn to come into them. I know the same was true of Stephen in the book he wrote in his last year, Becoming Vegetalista. He speaks really deeply of that process in that story. So, 500 years we've been in the process of dissociated mentation, of believing that our consciousness is internal and individual and resides strictly in what can be named by the rational mind. In fact, we could become so attached to that that I'm beginning to move even away from the word consciousness when I try to talk about what we move into and towards sentience, because sentience is about feeling. Thought evolved to be in the service of feeling, to be the dance partner of feeling, to add some grace notes in the song that the choir of feeling is creating, but not to be in charge, not to be our only reality. It actually took a whole lot to convince us that thought was real. I mean, it took Rene Descartes 72 cups of coffee to get sufficiently into his head to not be able to feel his body anymore and say, I think, therefore I am. And it's like, I have a history of drinking a lot of coffee in order to deal with this culture, but I've not yet done 72 cups. I'm not sure I want to go on that Cartesian trip anyway. Got too close to it for too long as it was. Um, and it was in that same era that William Harvey, cutting open bodies, gave us the idea that the heart is a pump. It's that same era that James Hillman spoke of when he said, once the earth was declared dead, the autopsy could begin in earnest. And we know that that same process was being performed on us individually and collectively. So, dissociated mentation. Some of you heard me reference this yesterday. Another of Stephen's turn of phrases, he's everywhere, but always behind me when I'm teaching. Um, but if you know anything about dissociation, you know that dissociation tends to be the result of trauma. And so if collectively we've come into a dissociated mindset, it follows that that came from enormous trauma. And that came from the trauma that was the 17th century. And yes, there had been a lot of horrible things that had happened before. But there was a level of unprecedented violence that began to unfold in that century. It began with the Sassenach, the English, declaring that they were more human than some others, and beginning the simultaneous genocides they carried out across Ireland and Scotland and the Americas. And the Spanish were doing it too. They were doing it funded by, the English did what they did in Ireland and Scotland and North America and India, funded by the gold the Spanish were looting from Mexico and South America and the Caribbean. They used the rainforest of Ireland to make the ships they used to enslave the people they kidnapped from Africa and bring them over to North America to be part of that same process. And while they were doing this, all of a sudden, a lot of people who were in the business of trading money and chartering ships and creating things like the first corporations suddenly got rich. And wealth and status within the society at the time was defined by land ownership. And so these people, in order to have status, needed to own land. Well, there were two ways that happened. One was declared the places where the less than human people were to be uninhabited, and therefore you could go and divide those up. But the other was to turn inward, where in the English countryside, people had farmed land in common for centuries. Families, families growing up beside each other, generation after generation, woven together with the land, woven together by cycles of the land, woven together by the festivals and ceremonies they held. And some of those, changed their names, and the local goddess became a saint. But her day was the same, and the flowers he brought her were the same. And what it meant when her day came around was the same. And this was all weaving people together with each other and together with the land. Now, there was a lie that I was taught in high school in both biology class and history class. I don't know if they're still teaching that same lie or a different variation on it, but it's called the tragedy of the commons. And you'll hear people repeat this all the time as historical fact. They say, once upon a time, everybody grazed their sheep and their cattle together on the common pastures. But then, people got greedy and somebody woke up early in the morning to bring their cattle there first. They ate all the grass and then nobody else had cattle to eat any grass. And so this is why we can't have nice things like mutual aid and collective support. And the wise people in high places had to come in and divide the land up into private holdings. And just like Rene Descartes drinking 72 cups of coffee and deciding that thought was the only thing that was real, this was made up entirely by an American economist speculating about what might have happened as a thought experiment. Late 1970s, same time that Richard Dawkins was declaring the idea of the selfish gene, and Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher were running around declaring that there was no alternative to capitalism. This idea enters the public sphere with absolutely no evidence behind it. And the guy doesn't even pretend there's evidence. He just sort of writes it up as a thought experiment, then people treat it as fact. Wouldn't have been too hard to find the evidence. I mean, you wouldn't have even had to go back to do that much research. Friedrich Engels, of Marx and Engels, in his work as a sociologist, included some of the notes from the meetings of communities about the way that they co-administered the lands worked in common. I was there in plain sight. But that story had to be erased, just like the people had to be erased, just like the land had to be erased, in order to turn everything into a direction for consciousness to move in a direction, or for consciousness to be channeled toward production. And channeled toward production, it had to be disconnected from everything. Disconnected from everything, we became solely these individuals. And then becoming solely these individuals, what existed outside us was considered to be purely outside, and consciousness was considered to be purely inside. And any experience of anything beyond yourself became hallucination, when in fact, the idea of the isolated individual in the fully internal consciousness was the true hallucination. Amen. So, the reason why we had to become convinced that the heart is a pump, which, they give credit to Harvey, I will say he didn't have the instrument, the methods to measure the pressure that would demonstrate that this isn't actually true. He just saw the way it was moving and saw that the blood was moving in the same rhythm and thought, yeah, oh yeah, pump. And because he was working in his mindset, and also because, the crowd that William Harvey hung out with, they didn't spend much time with drums. In reality, the heart's a very powerful muscle. Its contraction could send a stream of liquid a mile into the sky. You would have to do 100-fold that in order to be able to actually move the blood through your body. The blood in your body moves through the electromagnetic dance of the charged particles of iron forming a vortex in your blood vessels that begins before your heart is formed. And then that swirling vortex pours into your heart. And when your heart is in the relaxed and open and resting position, the blood is flowing in. And as that blood is flowing in, 40,000 sensory nerves, 40,000 sensory neurons pick up on the subtle chemical content of your blood. That includes not only every hormone secreted by your endocrine glands and everything released from every one of your organs, but also includes the pheromones of every animal being in your environment and the aromatic exhalations of every plant in your world. And in that moment of surveying it, the heart is also picking up on, well, what was the particular flow of the blood, of that vortex? What rhythm was within that vortex when it came into me? Um, it's kind of performing its own version of what we perform externally when we do Chinese or Ayurvedic pulse diagnosis, getting information about what's happening, the mechanical forces within your body, but also the mechanical forces acting on your body. Because the wind moving against your skin is felt within your blood vessels and then is felt within that flow of blood into your heart. And so all this information becomes gathered up, and through the ventral branch of your vagus nerve, it goes up through your amygdala. From your amygdala, it sends signals to your hypothalamus to create the hormones that tell every organ in your body what to do, how to respond. But it also sends that upward into the right frontal cortex of your brain, where you begin to form the felt sense of what's happening, and then into the left frontal cortex of your brain, where you associate that with the map of the world that you already hold. And especially if you have high levels of serotonin, as some of our divergent brains do, or have ingested high levels of serotonin-like compounds, as some of our brains like to do, then you also change your map of the world according to the information coming in. Unless you're operating from the state of dissociative meditation, where you're saying the map is the instruction, you can't deviate from the map. But if you're open to the experience coming in, your map of reality changes in that moment accordingly. And it's not different than our other sensory information. Through your eyes, photons land on your retina, and the pattern of the photons landing on your retina is registered by your optic nerve and then is interpreted by your brain as light and shadow and color and shape. The vibrations in the air are amplified through your ear canal, just like the way sound gets amplified in a cave, and just like a drummer in a cave, you pick up your eardrum um, in its moment of stillness, picks up on the resonance of the waves moving through that air, and that pattern then is carried by your auditory nerve to your brain, where it's translated in terms of pitch and tone and volume. In the same way, the information that's carried from your heart to your brain is registered as the felt sense of the world, as our intuitive read on everything, as the emotional tenor of everything. It is the direct way the world is speaking with us. And then the world registers the shifts in our heartbeat, the shifts in our breath, the shifts in our pheromones, and changes accordingly. If you're sitting beside a rose and you breathe in the scent of that rose, small particles of the breath of the rose that were once part of the rose's body are within your body now. And first your olfactory nerve registers their presence. And as it registers their presence, that information actually bypasses all of your sensory gates, all of the sensory filters, and brings you into a state of open awareness that tells you kinship is available. And that then brings your heart into coherent rhythm. And that then allows you to receive the rest of the information coming in more clearly. And that shifts your heartbeat and shifts your breath and changes your pheromones. And the rose registers the change in you, and its chemistry changes accordingly. In this next exhalation, even though in a culture not trained very much in the art of scent, we might not be able to differentiate its subtlety at a conscious level. Its next exhalation will be chemically different and will be in response to the chemical changes in you. And you will breathe that in, and you will change chemically again, and that will go out to the rose again, and that whole conversation will continue to unfold. It was in the context of these living biological conversations that our nervous systems evolved. Emotional regulation was never meant to be an inside job. We can't do it by ourselves. If trying to do it by yourself is making you feel crazy, it's because it's kind of a crazy thing that we're doing. But even though we've gotten so mixed up in this place of dissociative mentation and built a whole world where that's architecture reflects the changes it's made to our internal architecture, all of this is still available to us, and it all still begins first with the beating of the heart and being with the heartbeat, and then with going out into the world. I'm going to check how the world's measuring time at the moment. Okay. Um, so, and I'll say that going outward is a next fundamental piece. When we talk about a trip or a journey, we act now as though those words are just metaphors. But in an ancestral context, that's not how they were understood at all. From an ancestral context, when you needed to understand something you didn't understand, you didn't go inward. You didn't sit around contemplating your own mind. And even if you did, that wasn't really going inward. You went outward. You went out to all of the rest of life and said, show me what I need to see right now. You said, I'm in trouble. I'm lost. I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. And you weren't expecting that you would come up with an answer. You were waiting for something to speak to you. that might be something that had a body in this world. It might be something whose body existed only in the other world. The distinction was not so important. What was important was that something was speaking to you, and that something that was speaking to you was kin to you. And like that council of kinship was saying, yeah, here's what's out of balance. Here's what you need to shift. And this was true in pretty much every culture. It's like here in North America, we talk a lot about the idea of the vision quest. And that certainly is an expression of this particular way of being that comes out of a lot of indigenous traditions in North America, and some words some English speaking people gave to a whole lot of different practices indigenous people were doing, but that always involved at this fundamental transition point in your life when you're becoming more fully a person. You don't learn to become a person strictly from other people. You don't decide what kind of person you're going to be. You go out into the world and say, show me who I am. Show me who I am to be. Show me how to be. I've just been going through a process of this myself. And we're always going through this process at some level, but um, part of my genetic inheritance was a condition that makes the heart muscle grow too strong. And, it's very interesting. It's like a lifetime. Yeah, I've had a lifetime of intense feeling in my heart. It's been working really, really hard with that. It's a little bit outstripped my kidneys in the process, and so they're a little bit worn down. And the kidneys, according to a lot of systems of medicine, are ancestral inheritance. And so I am saying to the ancestors, hey, yeah, I know there's only so much of this ancestral essence to go around, but I'm the first in 3 generations to be speaking your language. Maybe that counts for something. I can have a little extra so I can be around to pass it down. But then, yeah, with the heart, it had grown so strong that the muscle was obstructing the flow of blood, and I had to have it cut open, have some of that scraped away. And so that was that then became a process of my heart actually has had to be remaking itself over these past 8 weeks. And they also had to saw through my sternum. And so, yeah, at the end of 8 weeks, pretty much my sternum has grown back. I've gone back to lifting heavy things and putting pressure on it, and it hasn't. And it's responded well. So I think it's grown back pretty well. But in deciding how to do that, like, what am I going to do? How am I going to be remade? I got thinking about John Moriarty again. So Moriarty was, he was from West Kerry. He grew up just outside Killarney, not far from where my people lived from the year 1100 until the 1890s. Actually, some of my people are still there. It's just the direct lineage left in the 1890s and arrived there in 1100. Before that, we were in Cork. And so Moriarty grew up there, and then he went to university, got a degree in philosophy, and ended up teaching philosophy and literature in Manitoba. And he realized after a couple of years into the process, wait a second, I'm training people to be part of a culture that makes no sense. I don't want this culture to continue. Why am I training people to do it? And then he started talking with some of the First Nations people around him, and a lot of what they were saying made more sense. And he had the realization that, yeah, actually, my people have had this too. And it started being taken away from us about the same time it started being taken away from them. And thank you, First Nations people of Manitoba, for showing me these things. Time for me to go home. And so he went first to Connemara and then back to West Kerry, and went wandering out, he said, to find his bush soul, to find who he was in the forest, to find who he was in the hazelwood. And like lying in my hospital bed with the sawed through bone held together by wires, I got to remembering a recording where Moriarty talks about sitting in a little house in Connemara and somebody putting the bone of a dolphin into his hand. And is holding the bone in his hands and looking at it and saying, I have not in my body a bone that has the grace of this bone. And then he said, the dolphin was an animal who lived on land and who went to the sea and said to the sea, shape me to suit you. But what we have done is we have gone to the world and we have said to the earth, I will shape you to suit me. And that's why we don't have that grace. And so I said, okay, if I'm going to be remade, shape me to suit you. And I began, as soon as I was able, taking walks on the dirt road through the forest. First they were short, and then after a while it became 6, 7, 8, 9 miles a day. Paying attention deeply to what was there. And finally, as I was beginning to come back together more fully, walking one evening and seeing the first lady slipper blooming. And the flower of lady slipper, so graceful, so beautiful. No matter how many times I see lady slipper, every year when I see the first one, I am truly brought to my knees, kneeling down on the ground with a sudden gasp, and truer this year than ever was before. And that gasp, by the way, is breathing in the world, is taking the soul of the world into us. And with Lady Slipper, it's like the beauty of the sight of her that most of us know, but if you let yourself get really down there and put your nose right into her flower, there is the most exquisite scent of, it's almost like a slightly musky vanilla, because she's an orchid, but she's an orchid who loves the pheromonal world. And yeah, and seeing her and noticing the way in which that flower, there are many things that flower is shaped like, but one of the things that flower is shaped like is a little bit like a human heart with just a little bit that's open. And thought about something else Stephen talked about, which was that in the American Civil War, um, there were all these men sent off into battle who witnessed and partook in unspeakable horrors. And then the hospitals were full of them. And they were seeing something they had never seen or described in quite that way before, or not in those numbers at least. And they needed to give it a name. Like later on, people would rename it. Like after World War I, they called it shell shock. After the Vietnam War, they got even more clinical and called it post-traumatic stress disorder. But in the Civil War hospitals, they called it soldier's heart, which I think is really its true name. And even if it's not the battlefield of a military war, every trauma we experience is part of the violence of the war against life and the violence of the war against imagination, So every one of our hearts is a soldier's heart. And the medicine that they used to treat soldier's heart was the powdered root of lady slipper, which was a lot more abundant then than it is now. This is one of the reasons. I mean, it's not the only reason why it's less abundant now, but it's one of the reasons. And one of the things was, this is an amazing medicine when you give a powdered root. It will bring deep peace and deep calm to a nervous system. But then that will pass. And so if you're just giving that powdered root, that medicine's only going to go so deep. Most of the time. I'm sure there are some people who the plant managed to reach through that means. But if you had taken those same soldiers out into the forest and brought them into the presence of lady slippers and had them sit there, the healing would have been a lot different. It would have been a lot different for them and a lot different for the lady slippers. And, in having had a physically cut open heart in a world that keeps breaking hearts open, that was really, really profound for me to come to at that point of asking how to be remade. And I went back to, it's like, coming up as an herbalist, like most of us who work in the herb world get told this concept that the medicine that you need will find you, will show up where you are. It's like, well, yeah, that's kind of true. In fact, it's entirely true, but it's also not the whole story. As Julia McIntyre says, it's their experience too. And so a part of what I realized was the lady slipper was there before I saw it. It was there before it bloomed. The bloom called my attention. I was in the forest before that too. The forest was breathing in my exhalations, was taking in my pheromones, was feeling the rhythm of my heart and the rhythm of my footsteps. The forest knew what I was bringing. Because I had a question in my heart was open to receiving what the forest had to say. But what the forest had to say I would have been saying anyway, because I was the new being introduced to that forest. And the forest was saying, okay, yep, you're here now. And if you're going to be here, we need you to show up a little bit differently, and we need it to be differently in this way. And so my attention was brought to what would make it different in the way that the forest needed to allow me to be shaped to suit the forest. So I've spiraled for a while now, and I know we have just a short while left, and though I could spiral in so many other directions, I'd love to invite your voices and your hearts to weave in whatever way feels right, be it questions or observations or objections or sitting in the silence. And while the silence is beautiful, your voices and what rises through them is too. And so don't feel compelled to speak, but also feel free to. Yeah.
Speak of silence. I was thinking the loop that you would drag with feedback with self external is a spiral itself, a spiral of change. As the world interacts with you, you interact with the world, changing both parts, both the internal and external, all in one, the oneness.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that spiral being something that replicates at every level in all the worlds. And yeah, so where my ancestors come from, we have the river that in English gets called the Boyne, but which is the Boan, which is Boan is the name of the woman of the white cow of Bofinna, who was the woman who, in many ways, is the mother of the people. The woman whose milk is the path that souls travel, the starry road through the sky. The river of stars in the sky mirrors the river of water on the earth, mirrors the river below in the other world, and all flow from the same well. And that well they flow from ultimately is her womb. And there is a place at the mouth of that river where a stone chamber was built, where on the anniversary of the day that she conceived the child whose name is One Desire, Angus, a single shaft of sunlight comes into the chamber to illuminate the place where mother and father and child are buried deep within. And at the entrance to that chamber is a symbol of the triple spiral. And in English, that place gets called Newgrange. Some people in Irish call it Sheed and Broga, but the older name for it is Vrú na Boine. And Vrú can be mound, but also can be cave, and also can be womb. So its oldest name is Womb of Boan, womb of the woman of the bright cow. And it's that darkness that's at the center, and everything begins in darkness. Old Irish Year begins in darkness. It begins at the time that all life is pouring down into the other world through the roots and the seeds, and everything's going into the dreaming of the earth. The Beltana comes up in the white blossoms of the hawthorn and the blackthorn, and we come into the bright of the year. But the brightness, the swirling, shimmering whiteness comes out of the dark. And if we look at Beirlach Bowfinna, what we call Beirlach Bowfinna in English is the Milky Way. If we look at the structure of the Milky Way, it's a spiral. And what's at the center of the spiral? What's causing the dance of all the stars? It is a center of gravity, so strong in its presence that it holds the light within it. that we call a black hole. So that's Vruna Bonya too. What else is swirling in your cauldrons?
So I'm trying to reconnect with the old ways and old roots of my Polish lineage, and at least so far, it's been challenging to find where like that history and mythology and living tradition continues or has been translated. So, yeah, I'm wondering if you have any recommendations for how to find the thread of European or Eastern European indigeneity and lineage history that has I don't know, been so intentionally and forcefully eradicated.
Yeah. I would say the first place to begin is to know that it's already with you. To know that it's in your body, it's in your heartbeat, it's in your breath. And it's really with the body and with the voice that you can begin first to tap into it. And so I would say it begins with feeding the ancestors. And what do we feed the ancestors? Well, we feed them the food that that they would have eaten. And so we reach back as far back to what those foods would have been and put those out. But of course, if you were inviting your grandmother to dinner, you wouldn't put a plate of food in front of her and sit there and watch her eat it. You would eat your share of it with her too. And so, like creating that altar, that shared table, where there is the food that the ancestors are eating, and like later on, you'll take that food outside and bring it somewhere else where other beings will eat it. But you're also eating some of it yourself to have some of that experience of bringing it in. With language, it plays in as well. It's like you don't have to learn the whole of the language. The more of the language you learn, the more it will rearrange you. But just making even a few of those sounds, and I often recommend beginning with the words for thank you. And the way that those will echo in your chest, the way those will echo in your bones, the way those will move in your blood will begin to activate something, and it'll also be heard by those ancestors. And music and poetry and story from their traditions are ways of doing that too. And but if you're engaging poetry and story, read them out loud. Let those sounds be there. So that's a beginning place. And it's actually quite striking when people begin to do that, how quickly the information begins coming in other ways. And what I would say is, yeah, I don't know, I can't recommend specific sources about Polish tradition, and there may be a lot more that's missing. Always a place to begin everywhere is folk songs and folk tales, and look for the anomalous things. And get curious about what those might have meant, especially what those would mean in an ecological context. But then I would say, like at a nuts and bolts scholarly level, this tradition, the Slavic traditions, that would have been influencing Poland survived longer in the Baltic nations, and there's been more revival of that in the Baltic nations. So looking at some of those revivals, although being aware that, as with so many revivals, there has been some nasty right-wing shit infusing certain streams of it. But you also can look to, I can't remember if he's Latvian or Lithuanian, but the feminist archaeologist Maria Gimbutas, Gimbutas. I began with the gods and goddesses of old Europe, and she's reaching back to the Neolithic. And it's like anything post-Neolithic, you're getting something that got a bit distorted anyway. So Gimbutas is a good place to begin. Um, I also, another way that I'll work with things is I will look at plant and animal names in the language and research their etymologies. And following through their etymologies, you begin to get toward things. Yeah, so those would be my starting places. Please, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. What else is arising for people?
Have you studied Chinese medicine?
Yes and no. Studying would be a strong word. I would say I learned some things about Chinese medicine. Um, First is that traditional Chinese medicine is not traditional. It was invented in the 1940s by the Chinese government in order to take the cosmology out of Chinese medicine, in order to remove all of the spirits and all of the stories about the world. Not that it's not without value. And there's a new story that adds value to it, which is that I give a little bit more kudos to the practice of Chinese medicine in the United States, because community acupuncture in the United States was first practiced by the Black Panther Party, and the primary common treatment, acupuncture treatment for addiction, was invented by Mutulu Shakur, based on Chinese medicine principles. So, lineages get to reroot, and that's some pretty cool rerouting. But but older forms of Chinese medicine exist, but it was never monolithic. There were always different regional and family traditions passed down. And for a long time, I tried to make sense of the system that emerged in the 1940s, and it didn't make sense to me. And it turned out it was because they took out everything that grounded it in a cosmology. And as the wonderful Northern tradition storyteller Andres Carnaval says, if you want to do magic, you need to have a cosmos to do it in. So I have delved a little bit into realms of classical Chinese medicine and developed like enough understanding of the Taoist cosmology and principles to do some rough, bad translation and apply them in my practice. But that is where I learned about the kidneys carrying the ancestral essence, and started talking with my ancestors about, yeah, Laurum Gaelga, I'm speaking Irish. Can you give me a little bit of extra essence? Nobody's done that in a couple generations. I'm doing it in the service of rearranging my mind to be more like yours. That's the other thing, is the grammar of a language reflects its cosmology. And when we go to the uncolonized grammars of ancestral languages, and you can do this wherever your ancestors are from. I mean, if your ancestors are English, you can just go back to Anglo-Saxon. And maybe some Welsh, because that's a cousin of the Pictish language that Celtic English were speaking to. Um, but going to those, but the grammar and structure of languages rearranges thought, and rearranges thought in ways that reflect and change cosmologies. And so there are two things, especially in the Irish way of speaking, that have been essential to me. And one of them is the way of speaking about emotions. I would never say Escuelga is bron me. I would not say I am sad. I wouldn't even say ta me bron. So we use is to say I am in a really permanent way. If we want to be really emphatic about it, we say ismisha. We have a special pronoun for I'm definitely this. And then if we're speaking about the moment, we would say ta me. But we wouldn't use any of those in speaking about an emotion. We would say ta bron autumn, ta ahas autumn. Sadness is upon me. Joy is upon me. And that shifts the relationship quite profoundly. Interestingly, it shifts the relationship almost exactly the same way that Monotropa uniflora ghost pipe shifts the relationship with sensation and emotion. But the other is that there is no possessive in Irish. This isn't my sweater. I mean, I can say that actually in Irish, but but that'll be a secondary thing to be speaking of. Um, I wouldn't just I wouldn't just call this Sean's sweater. I would say this sweater is toward me. Ta angansi so agam. And that sense of towardness becomes a relational sense. And so that then changes the relationship with everything. It's not defined by you. You are situated in relation to it. And then going back to Moriarty, and I do suggest you go to Moriarty. He's people find him very hard. Some people have come up with books to try to make him easier. Skip the books that try to make him easier. It being difficult is part of the point. You're supposed to grapple with the fact that the way of thinking and speaking is different. And if you listen to his voice, so with both Moriarty and Buhner, if you listen to their voices before you read their words and get their voices in your head and their cadence in your head, it'll land a little differently. But one of the things that Moriarty would talk about a lot is this concept of towardness. He would say, what are you toward? And he would always say, my primary towardness is that I am toward divine ground. That, whatever else is happening in my life, I am oriented toward divine ground. And of course, when you're toward divine ground, that towardness reveals to you that all ground is divine ground. He would say, every bush is a burning bush, and all ground is divine ground, and I am toward divine ground. But when you have the Irish, it adds this other dimension to it. Because when he's saying, what are you toward? What he's really saying is, what do you belong to? And so that becomes an essential question. The two questions from Moriarty I go back to over and over again are, what am I toward? which comes from his I am toward divine ground. And who do I consent to dream me into being? And yeah, he speaks there of the young man traveling on the road who comes across the woman with the terrifying visage and accepts her kiss and gives his kiss, and everything's transformed by that. And he wakes the next morning, and he hears a voice saying, "You have become the dream of a people. Walk naked to Tara and embrace your destiny." And so I would end by saying, every one of you has always been the dream of a people. You are the dream of your ancestors. You're also the dream of your descendants. Whether or not you have biological descendants, you have descendants. There are people in the future whose lives have been changed by the words you speak, by the actions you take, even just by the fact that the breath that passed through your body took on a certain quality, and that your heartbeat changed the rhythms etched into the world. They are your descendants. And lately, more and more, when I've been like, I don't know how we get out of this bind that we're in. It's like for a long time, I've gone to the ancestors, and that's still a good thing to do. And I especially go to the ancestors on their holy days, because I know that somewhere in the past they're gathered then. And I say to them, can you speak forward? Can you help me remember? But more and more I've been going to the descendants, because like if my towardness of bringing life to their ways and in order to bring life back to the world moves anywhere vaguely in the direction it wants to move in, like at a Samhain a century from now, there will be descendants of mine remembering their ancestors, and I'll be gone, but they'll be telling the story of this is how their ancestors made it through this time. And so I'm saying, can you tell that story a little bit louder? Can you raise your voices in a really strong song? Because we don't remember how we did this, but you can help us remember. So we're each the dream of the ancestors and the descendants, and of all of the living world, because our ancestors and our descendants aren't only human. And so you have become, and you are, the dream of a people. Walk forward and meet your destiny. Ramagan. And by way of transition, I will say, first of all, I need to move swiftly to another room. You're welcome to move with me. I'm going to go talk about bad trips in room 217. But if you want to talk with me about things other than bad trips, I'll be around the rest of the day. Also, every Sunday night except this Sunday night, I speak for 2 or 3 times as long online, and people are welcome to join in. There are flyers from my other World Hedge School. And if you want to sit with my words at your leisure, my book is for sale at the registration table. Thank you all. And whether or not you brought words in, you were part of co-weaving this meeting. And I'm so grateful to all of you for that.